ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to episode 159 of Fans of Power. I'm Nathan Kennedy, joined this week by Tyler Baker. Joe Amato, unfortunately, still having some technical difficulties on his end, so he will not be joining us this week, but we do have a special guest. Tyler's been hyping this up for weeks. Mr. Robby London, thank you. It's such a pleasure and honor to have you on here. I know Tyler is got a lot of questions for you. I know a lot of these guys have questions for you. We got multiple people in the chat here. We got Grim2, Adam Gabbert, Zen Brown, scrolling like Joe does, Delvis78, and I'm sure more are going to. Wiley Walt just joined us. We'll have more that'll pop in since we're live right now, like they usually do. But Mr. London, how are you, sir?
Hey, it's great to be here. I'm wonderful.
Oh man, I'm just I feel like because Robbie's a big Beatles fan, so I kind of feel like one of those screaming Beatle fans you see in like that footage of like the girls like screaming about the Beatles getting off the airplane. That's how giddy I am right now. Like I'm a
big fan, but I never screamed.
Okay, well I won't scream because I'm a man. I can't scream anyway, so it's just not a very He-Man thing for me to do would be to scream. But that's kind of how I feel with my level of excitement right now.
I think He-Man would be very embracing and inclusive. It would be fine if you wanted to scream.
I stand corrected. All right. Well, Robbie, I kind of just felt like we just hit the ground running and just kind of started to ask you what led you to Filmation.
Well, I was kicking around LA trying to make it as a songwriter, getting nowhere, and doing odd jobs in the entertainment industry. And a friend of mine had been working at Filmation, had just gotten a job there and said they were looking for writers. And I had done some writing. And so he recommended me and I got hired there. I got hired there for one day. My gig was for one day to create what are called story premises, which are just basically one-page ideas for a series. They were working on Zorro at the time.
Oh, yes.
For CBS. So I was hired for one day to write Zorro premises, and at the end of the day, I turned in my premises, and the boss there, the head of all the writing, was a man named Arthur Nadell, wonderful man, now dead. And he looked at my premises and he said, "You want to come back and work another day? You want to work tomorrow?" I said, "Yeah, great, I'd love to." That was a Tuesday. Turned in the premises. At the end of the day, he said, "Do you want to work tomorrow, Wednesday?" I said, "Yeah." So I was being hired a day at a time. And, finally Wednesday, he said, "You want to work through the rest of the week?" So it kind of went like that for many weeks, really. I wasn't really on solid footing. And then finally, after a few weeks, Arthur called me in his office and he said, "I just want you to know," he said, "as long as I have a job here, you have a job here," which was just a fantastic thing to hear for a guy that could not get arrested, throughout his 20s. I was 30 when this happened.
Wow. So
Filmation.
Man, so I guess prior to this, you're trying to work as a musician, so to speak, right? Songwriter, just kind of working trying to get into the music industry.
Yeah, but I had friends that were screenwriters, and they kept. I used to have jobs. I used to have a job as a reader, where you would evaluate screenplays for producers who were too busy or too lazy to read them themselves. So they'd hired readers to do what's called coverage. So I had done that. I'd seen a lot of screenplays. And then I had friends that were trying to make it as screenwriters, and they twisted my arm to co-write with them. So I'd had some writing background, and I'd done a few freelance things at Hanna-Barbera too, prior to this at Filmation. But I had done it as a ghostwriter under somebody else's name, which is a whole nother story for a whole nother time.
I almost felt like just your journey is like a podcast in itself, like with each step. I mean, I feel like there could be a whole rabbit hole of questions just to kind of go down, just you working as a
there is, but I think that's probably we want to get over to He-Man, I'm guessing.
Oh yes. that is the path we're on here, but I'm sure this will be a big hit with everybody. So I'm sure they'll definitely want to hear more. But so you landed at Filmation and you got Arthur's blessing.
Yes.
You're working on Zorro. So what's next? Like what's the next leapfrog?
Well, that particular season, Filmation had done really well in selling shows to the networks that season, the Saturday morning networks, which at the time were literally just CBS, ABC, and NBC. This was even before Fox, so there were only 3 networks showing cartoons in the world, and it was all on Saturday morning. And so Filmation had other shows that season, which I ended up working on all the shows that we did, including one called Black Star.
Yes.
Sort
Awesome.
of a forerunner to He-Man in its own strange way. And I wrote the very first script I ever wrote at Filmation was in fact a Black Star script called The Quest. And then
Yes.
I think the next I was kept on. They fired a lot. They had to fire is the wrong word. They had to lay off a lot of writers at the end of the season because the work was done. But I was fortunate enough, and it was quite flattering. They kept me on, even though they didn't have any work, because they wanted to keep a bare bones writing staff. And a lot of these experienced writers were let go, including the person that referred me there. He got let go, and I stayed. They wanted to keep me, which was great. And anyway, so I think the next season I worked on was I think Gilligan's Planet, which was I'm sure everybody's familiar with Gilligan's Island. And
yes.
This takeoff, the professor had made a rocket to escape from the island, and they shoot the rocket off, and it overshoots the mainland, and it overshoots the Earth, and it crashes on an asteroid. So now it's Gilligan's Island in space, essentially. And I worked on a season of that, which was really fun. We used all the original cast, except for Tina Louise refused to do it, but all the other originals were there in the studio, and I was writing for them, which was really incredible for me because I'd watched this show as a kid. And then the next season after that was Fat Albert. They did some new Fat Alberts, and so I got to work on Fat Albert, which was really an honor and fun. Although Bill Cosby was not the most pleasant man in the world, too.
Really?
Yeah, I probably shouldn't go there on this.
Oh no, we're if that's another podcast in itself. Because I was actually going to ask you, did you get to deal with Bill Cosby? Wow,
a little bit, very little. I mean, I mostly just observed him dealing with other people. I didn't deal with him personally that much, but I was there watching him, and it really wasn't pretty.
Wow.
Anyway, so that leads.
Well, I mean, I guess, of the things that have come to light about him in recent years, I guess it all kind of clicks now, looking back on it for you.
Yeah. He just wasn't a nice person, I didn't witness any of the sexual stuff. I can't speak to that, but
right.
He wasn't a very nice person.
I could see him being just sort of like really demanding of people and wanting to be like, don't you know who I am, sort of like aura to him.
I was fortunate enough in my career. I had a long career well after He-Man, and I got to work with all sorts of celebrities. I mean, really a lot, and some really big ones. I mean, some of the top 5 box office earner type celebrities, big movie stars. And, they run the gamut. Some of them are really, really nice and courteous and decent and gracious, and they're a pleasure. And some of them are miserable. It goes with the territory. You just, you have to try and do the job no matter who you're dealing with.
Really just put things in perspective, though, because I know the public likes to have a persona like, of Bill Cosby, of like being what he portrays himself on TV, and same thing with actors and actresses, and to be able to work with them one-on-one like that behind the scenes, I'm sure it's definitely eye-opening and
it is.
very.
It is. I mean, they're not called actors for nothing.
That's absolutely true.
Okay, so you're working on Gilligan's Planet and then Fat Albert.
Yeah.
Now, is He-Man, like before it's officially greenlit and coming down the pipeline, are there rumblings about this new property? Are you dealing with Lou at this point? Like, what's the I guess
I became friendly with Lou after my first few weeks. I have to say, I just have to digress. This is another huge rabbit hole, but Lou Scheimer, Arthur Nadell was a fantastic person. I loved him. He was just terrific. I have nothing but good things to say about him. But Lou Scheimer was something on another level from anybody I think I've ever met. He was so special and so gracious and so brilliant and so funny and just treated everybody so well. I mean, it was just such a pleasure to be in the building with that man and to call him your boss. It was just, anyway, I met him a few weeks after I was there. He just knocked on my door one day and said, I hear you're the new writer in town. I've heard good things about you. I'm Lou, which I thought was so nice. And so I become friends with him then, and friendly, I guess. I literally became friends with him later after Filmation. We stayed really good friends, and for the rest of his life, really very, very close. really happy and proud about that. Anyway, to answer your question about He-Man, I guess probably towards the end of Fat Albert, you're always working a year ahead in animation. You're always looking at next year's work. And that was Lou's job in particular. Arthur's job was pretty much to do this year's work. And Lou's job was to find next year's work. And I think I heard some rumblings about, talk with Mattel about some new property. And I remember the very first time I heard the title was He-Man. When you sort of leave the context of He-Man as we all know it now, it sounds normal to us. When you first hear that as a name for a series, it sounds like the most stupid, lame thing you've ever heard in your life. He-Man? God, that sounds dumb. I mean, and we were, the writers, when we heard about this, we were just joking about the name because it sounded silly. And then, so I guess during the off season, after Fat Albert, I think the writers that were there were me. I think Paul Dini came on around that time. And a guy named Tom Ruger, who had been hired, I think hired just a few months before I got there. So I guess he was the senior guy at this point. And me and Paul Dini, that's who I remember being there in this sort of interim period after everything and waiting for the next show. And that's when I remember first hearing about He-Man was with those guys and Arthur and Lou. And I don't remember the specific meeting, but I'm sure we would have been called into a meeting with Lou, and he would have started to tell us about it, and we would start to work on developing it.
So what becomes like your first duty on the show? Like when it's officially greenlit, Lou says this is what's coming, these are the characters. Like, what is your first step into this world of, is it getting yourself acquainted with the characters? Are you talking to anybody from Mattel? Is it pretty much just what Lou's given to you all and concept drawings and things like that? What's the first step into this world for you?
Well, my recollection is a couple of meetings that we had where my recollection is Mattel came to Filmation, and we went to Mattel at times as well. But the first thing that is in my mind was, I think Mattel came to Filmation and brought a bunch of prototypes of these characters. And I just remember a meeting, seeing these characters. They all had, in my mind, just ridiculous names. And I have to say, it wasn't really love at first sight. I think for any of us writers, we thought, stupid toys or something. I mean, I don't know if that was the exact, but it wasn't this, oh my God, this is great. Let's dig into this. It was, okay, this is our next job. Let's see what we can do with it. Let's do the best we can. So there had been a guy named Michael Halpern, who was a live action guy. I think that's the right name.
I'm familiar with him.
I think he'd worked on Fall Guy or one of these major shows. I think it was Fall Guy. And he had done up some Bible, but he had never worked in animation to my knowledge. And just again, to digress, I digress a lot, so I have to apologize to everybody. But to digress for a second, there's a huge difference in writing for live action and animation. It's very, very different style. And some of the world's greatest writers that are in live action just can't adapt themselves to what's required to write for animation, and vice versa. So it's just, I'm not saying one is better, but they're just different. And you kind of have to know, in my opinion, you kind of have to know what you're doing to write for animation because of, especially then, the limitations of the medium. The medium is not so limited these days anymore because the technology has exploded, exponentially. But back in those days, the animation was very, very limited. And there was something called pencil mileage, how much drawing was required and how things were going to be storyboarded. And you had to have a certain technical knowledge to write animation. And my recollection is Michael didn't really have that. And his Bible, it just didn't feel like an animation series. That was my recollection. And so my recollection is we redid the Bible at Filmation. And I'm not sure who wrote it. I found something in my files the other night as preparing for this call that was a Bible that looked like I'd written it, but I don't remember that. I think Tom Ruger wrote one version of it. I don't think Paul Dini wrote one. So it may have been a combination or whatever, but there was a Bible written somehow. And then the next thing I remember is Tom Ruger left to go to Hanna-Barbera right around then. And He-Man was sort of handed off to me. I think Tom was taking the lead at first because he had been the guy behind Black Star at Filmation. And Black Star was somewhat close to He-Man in the same sort of genre, the sort of fantasy space genre. And so I think Tom was the sort of natural first guy they thought of. But when Tom left, I was now the senior writer at Filmation. And so they gave it to me. And the very first thing I remember is writing a pilot script, which was Diamond Ray of Disappearance.
Oh boy. I really want to dig into this, and I'm very familiar with your thoughts on this. And I just have to say, I do feel like it's more than just a checklist episode. I don't think you give yourself enough credit for this episode.
Well, you're very kind, but I read it again last night, and my feelings did not change at all.
Man, unbelievable.
Yeah, I read three of my scripts last night, and it was an odd experience because it felt like I was reading somebody else's work. I mean, I had no sense of having written them. It was like somebody handed me scripts that somebody else wrote, and I thought two of them I was not embarrassed by. I thought, yeah, I think these are good scripts, and if I was going to write them today, that's probably how I would write them. And that was Dawn of Dragoon and Double-Edged Sword. So I won't be falsely modest about those. I thought those were pretty good, but I really I thought Diamond Ray of Disappearance was very, very weak.
Now, as a writer, obviously your credentials speak for themselves. You are an extremely well accomplished, very polished, writer. When you look at that script, and I mean, have you revisited the actual episodes themselves and see how they translate into animation?
No, I didn't watch them. No.
Okay.
I don't even know if I watched them. Here's another interesting digression. When you write animation scripts, and this is really true of me, one of the things you're required to do is you're supposed to really see the movie in your head. And you're supposed to direct on paper. That's one of the differences. In live action, they do not want you to direct on paper. Leave it to the director. Just write the dialogue and the sort of the bare bones of what the director needs. But in animation, they want you to really write everything out and really call the camera shots and really visualize it and translate that vision as much as you can to the paper. And every single time, every script I've ever written in animation, you see it in your head as you're writing it. And then when you see it produced, every time it is a disappointment. It never, ever matches the vision that you had when you wrote it. So I kind of stopped watching my shows because it was always frustrating. But to answer your question, no, I did not revisit watching the episodes. I just read the scripts.
Now, when it comes to your disappointment, though, with Diamond Ray of Disappearance, what about it exactly in the script seems just kind of weak to you?
Well, it just seemed like there wasn't much of a story. It didn't really go anywhere. It introduced all the characters. I thought I did a good job on that. And it had this basic conflict and the basic MacGuffin of the Diamond Ray. But it felt very static and felt, it felt stagey, almost like a play, which is the last thing you want to do in an animation episode. You want to really take advantage of going places and seeing different places. I mean, it sort of took place at the castle and in the cave and standing in the bushes and, Skelter saying, "Let's go get them." And I mean, it lacked, for me, it lacked cleverness of any kind or originality of any kind.
Now, do you look at it I guess on a lower level, especially because with Dawn of Dragoon, quite rich and expanding the world and really focusing on someone like Orko, and then like Double-Edged Sword with a very powerful message about violence and the ramifications of fighting and war and things like that. There's some more. You're pushing almost a little bit more in that. Whereas Diamond Ray, it's a basic action adventure episode, yet it's highly celebrated to this day by fans.
Listen, I mean, I'm thrilled to hear it. I mean, if people listening to this like it and you, Tyler, like it, I'm thrilled. I'm happy. I don't want to talk you out of liking it.
Oh no, and I'm not trying to talk you out of feeling the way you feel. I just want to let you know that I'm not joking. It's a highly celebrated episode. I mean, that's,
you know what? There's no accounting for taste. I'm happy. Makes me good.
I like the way you think about that, though. It's nice that even though in the grand scheme, at the end of the day, you're not particularly impressed with it, but the fact that everyone else loves it so much, you're content with that and you love that. So
well, and I mean, the thing that I do feel good about it was the very first script. I had no template, I had nothing to go on. Every other writer after that had my script as a template and other ones, but I started off with nothing. And so, just in terms of at least introducing the characters and putting them into a basic story, I did okay. There was a lot to do and a lot to accomplish. And I think, from a sort of setting up of the lore, I think it was okay. I think
It was more than okay. It was Emmy Award winning. It was
Well,
it's like I said, for me, it was the episode that still resonates with me today as setting up what you're going to see, depicting the villains the way they should be, depicting the heroes the way they should be. It's just an all encompassing episode, and I understand your views on. I'm not saying this blindly. Like, how do you not like that?
yeah,
But it's such a great episode. I mean, they made a Diamond Ray prop to put with the current Master of the Universe action figures. I've seen fan artwork, and it talked about a lot. It was obviously on the top 10 DVD release back in the early 2000s.
I couldn't remember. Did they put that on the top 10?
Yeah, it was voted by the fans before the actual
Oh.
official DVD release that you're on the documentary. There was a top 10 voted on by the fans. Five from season 1, 5 from season 2, and Diamond Ray was in the top 5. I think it was number 2.
And did Double-Edged Sword get voted in or not?
Double-Edged. I'm trying to remember. I've got it in the other room there.
Doesn't matter.
I want to.
That's the one that should have been voted in. That's all.
Well, and I don't
In my
argue that
humble
because there were
opinion.
some that were voting like, who voted for this episode to be on
Right.
here?
Right.
But
That's how I feel about Diamond Ray's disappearance. But I'm thrilled that it's on there. That's great. I'm happy.
yeah, because I know it was it's considered the first episode, even though it's not the official one that was produced, but it's the first episode, of course, the pilot episode, and it's I'd never met anybody because when I heard that you were not so fond, I was dumbfounded when I heard that. I
By the
really
way,
was.
In the script that I read last night, to my surprise, apparently it was not the final draft script because it still had Orko referred to as Gorpo. I'm sure you know that.
Yes, and which and now just to kind of because I feel like there's a connection here. Like I've already got 2 or 3 questions just based on what we've just already talked about. Can you elaborate on the that you are responsible for creating Gorpo/Orko, correct?
I am, and that was never a Mattel toy. And I remember as sometime around the time that I was working on a Bible or pilot, a man named Hal. Are you familiar with Hal Sutherland? Do you know who that is? I'm sure you do.
Yes, sir, I do.
I don't know if all the listeners would know or not, but he was the guy. Arthur Nadell was in charge of all the writing at Filmation, and Hal Sutherland was in charge of all the production that came after the writing. And he was one of the founders of Filmation with Lou. Lou and Norm Prescott and Hal really founded Filmation many years prior to when I worked there. And then Hal had left and moved to Washington State, where I now live. And when I first joined Filmation, Hal had already gone. And there was another guy working there in Hal's place that I won't mention the name, but people were not too fond of. And Hal came back, and right around He-Man, I think Hal came back. In fact, maybe he came back for He-Man. Maybe Lou asked him to come back. And I had a great relationship with Hal. I really liked him. He was kind of he was older, much older than me, and kind of a fussy guy. And some people had issues with him, but I just thought he was terrific. He and I really bonded. And because, there's a natural enmity between writers and artists in an animation studio. And the enmity is writers write all this crazy stuff, and the artists are expected to make it happen with very limited time and limited resources. And, they're working under tremendous pressure and limitations. And a good animation writer understands those limitations and respects them and works with them. But most animation writers don't know any better or don't care. And they just write stuff that's very difficult to produce. So anyway, I had this great rapport with Hal because I embraced the challenge of writing for animation. I liked having these limitations and trying to make my stuff work within the limitations. I thought that was a fun challenge. Anyway, Hal came down to me one day when we were talking about He-Man, and he said, I don't know who said it first, but one of us said, this really needs a sort of a comic relief character. It's the one thing that is missing. I mean, Cringer was sort of comic relief, but it needed sort of an ongoing, kind of an audience surrogate type of character. That's how we thought of Orko, was kind of an audience surrogate, somebody that young kids could identify as being one of them. They want to be He-Man. That's the aspirational surrogate. is He-Man
Mhm.
and the heroes, but they also want somebody that they could sort of imagine, more readily imagine themselves being. And so we came up with this idea of a little magician. And it was probably Hal's idea to make him float so we wouldn't have to animate the legs. I mean, that was just a clever, and also it's probably Hal's idea to have the mouth not be seen so he wouldn't have to animate the mouth. I mean, those are two brilliant animation ploys right there. And then it made Orko really, really facile to deal with in a technical sense. And so I probably came up with the idea that he was a sort of a slightly incompetent magician, and his personality and that. And I wrote something up on him, and I called him Gorpo. That was mine. And we submitted it to Mattel. And we changed it. I think Mattel didn't like Gorpo. I think maybe they did a focus group. I seem to recall they did a focus group, and it didn't test well the name. And then I guess Hal decided to put the O on his tunic there. And one of the things you do in animation is you sometimes what's called flop the animation. You take it, it's like turning a piece of paper over backwards, so you can use it going both ways. And so the G would not, if there had been a G on his tunic, you couldn't flop it because it wouldn't look like a G anymore. You had to pick a letter that is symmetrical, that when you flop it upside down, it still looks like the same letter. So somehow, I don't know who it was. I don't know if it was me. I don't know if it was Mattel. Somebody came up with Orko instead of Gorpo. And so it became Orko. But yeah, the character was me and Hal, some combination of me and Hal coming up with. And Hal's no longer alive to defend his role in it, so I guess I can take most of the credit.
I'm sure he'd be quite proud of what you had to share, though.
I stayed good friends with Hal till the very end. You know, when I moved to Washington, he was still living up here, and I would have lunch with him from time to time. He's a great guy, really great guy.
That's just fascinating. Now, there's something that our good friend James Heatalk had just kind of theorized that, because Diamond Red Disappearance appeared on the, and I'm sure you probably remember this event, that Filmation and Lou had put together a theatrical release of The Greatest Adventures of All to kind of help give publicity to the series that was coming out, and depicted 3 episodes in a theatrical film that had kind of like bumpers in between episodes of the Sorceress, kind of talking about the world of Eternia and introducing the audience to He-Man and the characters in it. Did you have anything to do with writing any of that, or?
Well, here's the answer. I think do you know when it was made? When it was done?
It was released, and I've got the tape. Hang on one second, because I got a copy of it right over here. It's my favorite VHS tape of all time.
Because we can forensically determine whether or not I was involved probably by the date of when it was done.
Oh, man. We're getting ready to find out some live breaking news here, people. Hang on here.
Wow, look at that collection. That's amazing.
Oh, yeah. He's admiring your collection right now.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't see it till you got up. That's amazing.
Yeah, and that's just a small sample. This whole room is all He-Man, and I've got tons of other stuff I just don't have room for in my apartment.
Wow.
Yeah. It's carded figures, movie stuff, original artwork. I got a VHS video store display right over here too. So,
wow.
1983 is the date on this tape.
Okay, then I'm pretty sure that I think I wrote the connecting material. I think I must have helped put it together. What were the 3 episodes?
Well, it's Diamond Red Disappearance, Tila's Past, or Tila's Quest, excuse me. Tila's Quest, and Colossus Awakes.
Yeah, I think I did it, but I want to apologize now to anybody out there that's listening to it that knows they did it. So
because I remember, because James has always been like the first who reports a lot of this stuff on the show. It has for years. I mean, even like the early days of the internet, and he did a small video on that, and him and Deucin had polished up and cleaned up all the segments of just the source, because this stuff has never been released on DVD. It's only been a VHS, and people have uploaded on YouTube.
Oh, that's
interesting. And I know, and I had it burned to DVD because I actually, if this stuff that you wrote in this, and because he seemed pretty confident that he felt that you were probably responsible for writing the sources.
I think I'll tell you why I think I was. It's not that I remember doing it, to be honest with you, but I mean, I was the first season of He-Man. I was kind of the main He-Man writer, and I would have been the guy. I just can't imagine they would have gone to anybody other than me to do it. That just would have been the right thing. And I vaguely remember being asked to do it, and I definitely remember going to the. I think they showed it at Grauman's Chinese.
That's it, because there's pictures of it. It's in James's video as well.
I remember going to Grauman's Chinese. It was such a thrill. That was the first time I'd ever seen my work up on the big screen. It was at Grauman's Chinese, no less. I kept waiting for them to ask me to put my footprints, but they never did. My handprints and footprints. You're smiling. You probably don't know what I'm talking about.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. I'm also
Chinese
wondering, like, when Diamond Ray's on the screen, are you booing the episode? Is this being projected on the screen?
Was I booing it?
Yeah, were you like, who wrote this? You know?
No, believe me, I was thrilled.
Wow, because I just have to say, like, it's really this tape and those segments, everything that you wrote, the sources, because to me that's the quintessential, like, portrayal of the sources, like her dialogue and everything, thanks to Linda Gary, of course. But your writing and setting up the segments in between each episode and closing it out with just some of the best dialogue, I swear, that's ever been written for the entire series. It's all in the footage on this tape.
I'll have to go back in my files and see if I can find it, because I really don't have any recollection of it. But I mean, I hate to take credit for something I didn't do, but I think I did it.
I'm going to give you credit, and I think people listening, and I'm sure James and Deuce will probably give you credit for it as well, because it's tremendous work. It's on YouTube if you haven't. It really, like, along with Diamond Ray, it was just a I mean, it would give me chills. It really, and still to this day, like, especially as it wraps up, like, as the sources is kind of sending the audience out and setting it. I mean, the dialogue is just absolute perfection. I mean, it's just beautiful. But I that was something that's like, I have to ask Robby about that, because it's just kind of one of those unsolved mysteries. Like, there's just not a whole lot printed about it.
Well, you get 80% thanks for the 80% certainty that I did it.
That's more than 50% people. So I think it's safe to say we know who did it.
Well,
at least that's what I'm going with here. So yes, all right.
I'll tell you what, until somebody claims otherwise, we'll say I did it.
Oh, I like that. Okay, well, now that we've got, man, God, it just leaves me kind of dumbfounded when I'm learning this kind of stuff from you.
Well, I just learned something from you. I'd forgotten about that one.
Oh, man, this is so cool. Thank you so much, Robby. Like, I know we're not even done, but I have to thank you immediately for this, because
that's fun.
Now let's move on to Dawn of Dragoon.
Okay.
Like, I mean, I know it's been a while, of course, but do you remember coming up with the idea of, like, making Dragoon such a... Now, let me ask you this, and this is another thing that James E. Talk had alluded to before, is that Dragoon was supposed to appear earlier in the series as one of Skeletor's henchmen, correct?
I don't recall that. My recollection is I came up with a name first. So many times in animation, it's just a name, some clever name or some cool sounding name. And my recollection is that I came up with the name Dragoon. I don't think Mattel did. I think that was me.
Mm-hmm.
My recollection is I did it for this episode.
Okay, James, if I misread your info, because I thought James had said that a while back, but he's usually right 100% of the time.
I might be wrong. I mean, this was what, 35, 40 years ago? This is a long, long time ago we're talking about. So it really is like forensic archaeology. But my recollection is I came up with the name, and I came up with it in conjunction with this episode. That's my first recollection of Dragoon.
Okay.
That's the first thing I came up with, was the name. And then, I wanted to do an Orko episode. I mean, Orko was my character, and I thought it would be fun to do an episode that focused on him. And I think the first idea, I was 32 at the time, I guess, and I was single. And I was a typical horny 32-year-old guy.
I know where this is going.
I was obsessed with women. Was on my mind. Not just 7 women on my mind, 7,000 women were on my mind. I wasn't on their minds, but nonetheless, I wanted to write something with a slightly romantic. I wanted to sort of go in that direction, which He-Man avoided mostly like the plague, because He-Man was targeted for young boys, especially toy companies really separated out boy target and girl target audiences. They made completely different toys. They had even completely different division. They had boys division and girls division at Mattel. One of the challenges of adapting a toy to television is in television, you really have to aim for what they called a bimodal skew, meaning both genders. And the challenge with a lot of boys' toys lines taking them to TV or entertainment is to try to bring girls into the picture. And try as you might, He-Man was always going to be basically a boys' targeted show. And so, the popular wisdom, and I'm sure it's true, is that 5 to 12-year-old boys who are our target are not really interested in romance. At least they weren't then. And they don't want romance, and it's mushy, and it's yuck, and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. So, but nonetheless, I was 32. I wanted to write something with a little bit of romance in it. I thought it'd be fun. And so I got the idea of trying to come up with a girlfriend for Orko, a female version of Orko. And then I think from that, I got the idea of going back to his land, of this sort of girl from Orko's land coming to seek his help, and him going back, and him being considered this big shot, famous magician in his land, and I think that was the derivation of it all. And then I blended that with this name Dragoon that I had, that I thought was a good name for a villain. And those were the elements that sort of I put together into the story.
Now, what is the concept of, because a lot of these elements have been carried on through, various canons, and I mean, Drio would show up in like the Star comic book series, and the whole idea that Orko landing on Eternia, his magic's not so strong, but if you put him in Trala, it's kind of everything's reversed in Trala. Like, where does the origin of the basics of how Trala works? Because it's a fascinating idea in the mythology that fans still gravitate to this day.
Well, first of all, I compliment you on pronouncing it the way I intended. That's exactly. And in fact, when I was looking at the script last night, every single time Trala is mentioned in the dialogue, I put in there for the actor to get it right. I put rhymes with Paula. And so it was really an awkward read to keep every time you're reading a line and you see Trala, parentheses, rhymes with Paula, blah, 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 blah. But anyway, I made a big point to get it pronounced right. I honestly didn't give it a lot of thought. I just knew I wanted to make it as different as I could from Eternia. And I thought, kind of a magic land. I think that's probably what was in my head, is Orko is a magician. And so what can we do to make the land magic? I mean, Eternia is magic too. There's so many different aspects of Eternia. And anytime a writer wanted something, you could just make up a new land or a new place in Eternia. Like, I think I noticed that I used a place called the Sands of Time. And I don't know if that was done before or I just made it up for that episode, but that was one of the things that you could do with Eternia, is you could just, for your episode, you could just make up a new place called Sands of Time. So I decided with Trala, I guess, just to make it really more magical and beautiful and a little more soft. I guess I wasn't really thinking, what I'm about to tell you is not really what was in my head, but as I think about it now, in a way, it was a little more towards a girl's toy line than it was boys' toy line. It was a little more of a feminine kind of world with flowers. I remember I described in the script flowers and rivers, and it was this very idyllic is another word I might use. I think I tried to make it very idyllic. And the idea that Orko's magic was so strong there and didn't work so well in Eternia. And I really liked the idea also that He-Man was disabled, as it were, from this episode. So it really, Orko had to rely on himself, and the audience had to rely on Orko, because he couldn't just call on He-Man. He-Man couldn't just save the day as he normally would in the episode. So I thought that was another, I think that one of the things I liked about this episode is I had so many different things going on in it that to me as a writer were interesting. And I think they all kind of worked together in a nice way without seeming like I piled too much too many incongruent elements into it. I put a lot of different, I think interesting things in it, and they seem to work together really well.
Oh, absolutely. From the whole how the world of Trala works, Dragoon himself, who's another highly celebrated character, so much as his demeanor, his dialogue, like, when you're writing these new characters, do you have an idea and like like for Alan Oppenheimer, who did the voice of Dragoon, are you writing notes on how you want the character to sound? Or like for Driel, do you have ideas for that stuff? Or is that pretty much left up to the voice actors to figure out?
Sometimes you do. And I'm going to digress again for a second, but this is, to me, is a wonderful digression. Filmation was the last studio to produce everything in one building. Everybody had started to outsource, various aspects of animation, a lot of it to overseas because it was so much more cost effective. And Lou was one of Lou's huge rallying cries and principles was he wanted to keep everything in the U.S., in LA, and in fact, he wanted to keep it all in one building. And so, as I say, Filmation was the last place ever to do that in a major way for series television or feature films. And so everything in Filmation was done in that building, and I mean everything, including all the voice recording. They would come to the building. There was a recording studio in the building. And so one of the things, many things I loved about working at Filmation is I quickly got to know, people in all the departments. When I first started working there, I started following my scripts from department to department and introducing myself and finding out what each department did and asking them what their concerns were and what I'd done right and what I'd done wrong. And I'm a curious person, I don't want to paint myself as this great altruistic do-gooder. I just am curious. I'm really curious about how things work. And I enjoy the challenge of trying to make them work better. And so Filmation was great for me in that sense because I got to go around to all the different departments and learn the whole process. And this was, 2 years prior to He-Man I had done this. So I was well ensconced at Filmation by the time He-Man started. And I knew people in all the departments and I pretty much understood the process. So anytime I was writing something and I had an idea that I thought was worth including in the production and I had a very specific idea about it, I could just walk into somebody's office and say, hey, I'm doing this script. I've got this character named Dragoon, and I think if he that's a bad example I picked because I don't remember anything specific about him. But when there was something specific, like the jet chair for Double-Edged Sword, I could go to the designers and say, here's what I had in mind, and talk it through. And so the answer, that's a long answer to your question. I went way off field there, but to answer your question, anytime you felt you had a strong vision for something and you wanted to communicate it, you could put it in the script, which I would do, and you could go talk to somebody. You could go talk to Lou, who was the director of the voices. He or Erica, who were directing the voices. Erica at one point came in and was doing voice directing. So you could go talk to the voice directors about what you're looking for, and they don't have to listen to you. I wasn't the boss. I was just a writer, but mostly people welcomed it. They were happy to get the input. I don't remember any specific input I gave about Dragoon. No, I don't. Or Driel, for that matter. I don't think I gave any input about that either.
It's just a testament to Linda and Alan's portrayals of those characters, so to speak. And in your original script too, and we've seen at least one shot. Dragoon originally dies in this episode, correct? Like he falls.
What I had in the script, he fell into what I had a name that I thought was a good name. I can't remember now, like the bottomless pool or something, but it was better than that.
The bottomless hole of Trolla.
It was something like that. But it was a concept, which I thought was kind of a fun concept of a hole that never ends. That, you bring up an interesting point, Tyler, because one of the big forbidden aspects of writing children's television in those days, and I'm sure it's true today too, is you couldn't kill people. Death was a no-no because it was too frightening for children, at least on television. I think in Disney features you could probably do it, but on TV you could not kill people. So that's why we were constantly trying to come up with these gimmicks of like the bottomless hole of Trolla, where he's cursed to fall forever, which is basically death, but you're not allowed to call it death, and you're not allowed to show a body, you're not allowed to show a weapon killing somebody. You couldn't show any of those things. So you could just sort of conceptually kill him by dropping in a hole that never ends. I don't remember. I mean, the answer is yes. Of course, I wanted to kill him, but you're not allowed to kill anybody. So that's what I did.
I'm sure that kind of happens a lot in all these animated shows because Tyler and I, we do another thing, Capes and Commentaries, and there's so many things from G.I. Joe and other shows. It's like, I bet they had the intention of they wanted to kill that guy off, but they knew that they couldn't.
Oh, absolutely. By the way, I worked on G.I. Joe as well. I was
unbelievable.
Anyway, yes, that's completely true of animation writers. It's one of the frustrating things is the limitations you have in writing for children, or at least the gatekeepers' perceptions of what you can't do for children. I mean, we all might have different opinions of what children can handle and what is okay, but the gatekeepers are the ones that matter, and they had very strict rules about what you could and couldn't do. Another great example is, and you see this all the time, is a lot of times you're not allowed to actually hit somebody, to strike somebody. So you have these crazy things where you throw a rock at a chandelier and the chandelier drops down and entraps the person. And that's just a way to get around hitting them, you know?
Yeah, and I noticed that throughout a lot of episodes, because I know, like in another episode you had done, it's in Driel's Return where He-Man's duking it out with Clawful. Like, you clearly insinuate He-Man just punched Clawful right in the face, but you don't show, but it's implied that's what happened.
Yeah,
and I always thought that was such a big moment for me as a kid watching that. It's like, oh man, He-Man actually is like punching him. Like, you don't actually see the contact, but it's.
Hey Tyler, I wanted to show you. Believe me, I would have loved to show you the contact, but it wasn't allowed.
And I completely understood that. As I got older, even as a young adult, I was watching the show and was kind of doing as much research as I could find, and understood the limits that were put on children's animation, especially in He-Man when it came to violence and stuff.
Right.
And one of my most favorite scenes of the entire series is the fight between He-Man and Dragoon, and how it wraps itself up, where Dragoon takes the tumble over and He-Man pulls him back up. And some of the best dialogue, because it's so serious. I mean, with the music that's played and the delivery of Alan and John doing this dialogue that you wrote, where Dragoon questions, you risked your life to save me, I wouldn't have saved yours. And one of the best lines of dialogue I've ever heard He-Man say throughout the whole show is, "I may be your enemy, but you're not mine." Like, it's a line that when I watch that episode, it gives me chills because of just how commanding that line is, and it's so simple. It says everything you need to know about He-Man in that one line of dialogue of what kind of character and hero he is. I just thought it's such a powerful message for kids, but just in terms of entertainment, telling a good story and what these characters are about. It's tremendous work that action sequence.
Thank you very much. It's funny. The script I read last night must have been a slightly earlier draft, because I think in the script I read last night, I think he just falls in the bottomless hole and that's it. And I was thinking when I read the script, I must have unconsciously remembered, because I was thinking, it's not really like He-Man. I'm surprised He-Man didn't reach and save him. I thought to myself that would have been a better ending. So I must have read an early draft, because apparently that's how it ended. He-Man. I have no recollection of writing that.
But, okay, well, I'm going to give you credit for it, because you are the guy who wrote.
No, believe me. No. On my scripts, I know I would have been the one to do it. I would have been the one to write that.
See, that's why you need to go back and revisit these episodes.
Wrote my scripts. I rewrote my own scripts.
Wow, well, I had to tell you that, because it is it's extremely powerful, and I just
that is a better ending, by the way. It is better than what I read in my script last night. So
I mean, when I first learned that, though, I thought that's pretty gutsy. And like, I would have loved to have seen that as a kid. However, as an adult or as a child, I did think it was cool to kind of feel like Dragoon turns over a new leaf, based on having his own life in danger like that. But as an adult, I appreciate it so much more. Like, that's why I still love this show, and a lot of people do too. There's so much more in these episodes that you guys wrote that I appreciate more as an adult. That as a child, I'm loving the characters and the action, but there's the messages and the dialogue and the characters and how they are develop in each episode. That's stuff that it sticks out to me more as an adult, and of course after watching them so many times as well. It's episodes like this that age like fine wine, because these are the kind of episodes that you would show someone who's never heard of He-Man. Like, this is why I like this show, is episodes like this.
Oh, thank you very much. That's wonderful to hear.
Let's see. All right, now we definitely need to move on to Double-Edged Sword. because
Okay.
that's another emotionally charged episode.
You know, there's one thing I should share about Dawn of Dragoon that I think is a kind of a fun story that I've never.
Please do.
In my original script, first of all, there's a thing at the end where they show faces. And
Yes.
was my analog for having sex, which of course I wasn't allowed to do, but I wasn't even allowed to do it in real life, I might add. Try as I would. So I came up with this idea of showing face. I thought that was kind of a fun idea because you'd never seen Orko's face, and it was, that was the thing. And my idea was, and this was, the next thing that I'm about to say was pure hubris and ego on my part, but I wanted to have the episode where we see Orko's face. That was my selfish intent. And so I wrote in the script that we, the audience, would actually see Orko's face when he showed it to Driel. And this would be the only time we ever got to see Orko's face. So I basically wanted to have a famous episode. That was my thinking in this. And Arthur Nadell, to his great credit, who was my boss and was, had the final say-so of scripts, said to me, "You can't show his face." And this was, I mostly agreed with Arthur. We didn't have very many creative disagreements, but this was the one sort of big creative disagreement that we had. And it was never unpleasant or angry. It was a purely academic disagreement, and fun. But I begged him. I begged him to let me show his face, and he wouldn't go there. He just said, "You can't do it. It ruins the magic to see his face. The fun is not ever seeing his face." And so Arthur got the last word because he was the boss. We didn't get to see Orko's face. And in retrospect, I'm not sure how soon I figured it out, but I figured out, of course, Arthur was right. He was 1,000% right. It's so much better to not know. That's part of the mystery of the character. And I'm grateful that Arthur was able to tame my selfish instincts. Although there was a storyboard artist, I think it was Steve Hickner, if I'm not mistaken. And I think maybe he got an early draft of the script. Maybe he's the guy that boarded the script. I don't remember. I used to know all the storyboard guys and hung out with them a lot. And maybe Hickner boarded this one. But anyway, Hickner drew a design of Orko's face.
Yes, it's actually in the book James Eatock put out pretty recently. It's got a full colored splash of Orko without the scarf around and the hat on his head.
Yeah. So it was revealed, I guess, but it would have been better if nobody had ever seen it, as far as I'm concerned. Arthur was right on.
Now, anyway, when you saw the concept of what Orko was drawn as without his mask, what was your thoughts? Is that what you envisioned? Did you envision something else?
I didn't. I don't know if I had a vision. I can't remember if I did. I don't remember it now. I think my thought was to leave it to the artists.
Wow.
Well, what he said just now, kind of, and the people in the chat are kind of saying it too. It's very reminiscent of our co-host Joe Amato, who always wears a mask, and none of us have ever seen his face. So maybe it's just best to leave that a mystery.
You literally don't know what this guy looks like?
Nope.
He shared a picture of himself once on Facebook wearing a shirt that someone had sent him, and he's wearing sunglasses, and it was up for a very brief period, and that's kind of part of his gimmick. He just doesn't share anything personal about himself on social media. He keeps himself. I mean, if you talk to him, he's about as sweet a guy as you could possibly get. And I hate that he's not here because he'd be having a field day with us right now. But he does not show his face. He just never has. And he's even me and Nathan. Like when we talk off air, like he does not show his face. He stays.
Maybe he's on America's Most Wanted.
He may very well be, and he's just. I mean, because we do joke like he's a mob boss of Ohio, He's got all these connections and stuff. So it's something we play around with since we don't know. So we're like, I might as well have fun with it here. But that's absolutely fascinating to learn that about the show, because it is such a memorable moment in the episode. Because at least in silhouette, you see Orko's the shape of his head. Which as a kid, that was so fascinating to see that when you see like, oh, it's kind of round up here and very pointy ears. Like it was exciting to at least see an idea of what Orko looks like. And then obviously Driel had to been like super sexy based on Orko's reaction when she takes off her, her mask,
That's the great thing is it shows that attractiveness is completely relative. And and one person, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It's really, I mean, I don't think we would find that species attractive, but they found each other beautiful, which was great.
Well, you told a great love story in it because even as a boy, like I appreciated pretty women in cartoons, and if the hero gets the girl, like I did like that. Like I wanted to see him, kick a lot of butt all over the place, but if he gets a
Me
kiss from a
too.
beautiful woman at the end of the day, I'm like, see, that's my kind of hero. That's what
Me
I always
too.
wanted to be
That's how
like.
I felt too. That's why it always kind of annoyed me that you were so discouraged. We were so discouraged from writing that kind of stuff because of the belief that it would turn off young boys. But I'm with you. It didn't turn me off.
No, I mean I was chasing girls in daycare, so I was all about He-Man getting the girls.
Well,
Absolutely,
I was a little later than you. I probably started in elementary school, but still,
still pretty young
we
ages, yeah.
started young. Yeah, we started young.
So no, I would have
Unfortunately,
appreciated more.
unfortunately, I started young and finished young. Unfortunately, but go ahead. Ba-ba-boom, ba-da-boom.
But yeah, we need to have that little drum sound effect there for all of Robbie's or gags he's got for us here tonight. This is great. Now, what led you to Double-Edged Sword? Like, do you just kind of decide you want to push the message about violence to
Yeah,
kids?
I'll tell you exactly. I do remember this. I remember two things about this. One is before I'd even written the first episode of He-Man, and I wrote the first one, there was one of these children's television advocates, a psychiatrist named Dr. Thomas Radecki. I even remember his name. And there was an article in Time magazine or something, which was the big magazine of the time, talking about this new show from Mattel called He-Man and how violent and horrible it was and how bad effects it was going to have on kids. I mean, it made all these assumptions about the show based solely really on the name and maybe prototypes of the toys. I don't know what information this guy had to write the article. But the point is that the article came out before the first episode was even written, let alone broadcast. And, it just started from there. And we took so much incoming fire from these children's television advocates and critics and psychologists and this, that we were, doing bad things for kids and promoting violence and all this stuff. It was a big deal in children's television in that era. And really throughout my career in children's television, that was always an issue. And there were always these advocacy groups that raised these issues. So that was on my mind. It was frustrating that, and by the way, when I wrote all these scripts, I don't think I'd seen, maybe the last script, I'd seen some of the footage from the first episode. But the point is, you write most of the scripts before you see any footage because of the lead time that's required. You have to finish the scripts almost before you see animation. So a lot of writers are just writing in the dark. You have no idea what this is going to look like or what the show is going to look like. And yet we were taking all this heat. So anyway, I was I remember being at a party one night, and I don't know why I remember this. It's the oddest thing to remember, but I've always remembered it. I remember being at a party and thinking about violence, and maybe somebody was talking to me about it at the party, and I got this idea: why not take this issue head on? Why not really address the issue of violence in television in a story? And I don't know why, but I really, really like this idea. I mean, rarely have I gotten an idea so powerfully that just hit me that I instantly felt that excited about. I really felt I was onto something. And it was like Dawn of Dragoon in the sense that I think the script brought a lot of really, to me, interesting elements together. The old man in the jet chair and
Yes.
his pacifism and this secret past he had. And there was a little bit of, if you're familiar with To Kill a Mockingbird, which is probably my favorite book.
Very good film.
Well, the book is better than the film. As if you take the greatest book and the greatest film made from the greatest book, the book for me is always better than the film. And if you've never read the book of To Kill a Mockingbird, I think it's the greatest book ever written. Seriously, I encourage you to check it out.
I will gladly take that recommendation.
It's incredible. But so you'll know the scene from the movie. But Atticus Finch kind of seems like a pacifist. And there's that scene where the rabid dog comes on the street, and he gets all the townspeople say, "Atticus, you got to help us," and they give Atticus the rifle, and it turns out he's a dead shot, and he shoots the rabid dog. And his kids, who kind of thought he was a wimp, can't believe that he was the best shot in town. And it's that he chose. It's not that he can't shoot people; it's that he chose not to not to use that skill. He didn't want to be a shooter. At least that's what I read into it. Maybe more of this was in the book than in the movie. But I know that scene was in the movie, but maybe more of the dynamic behind it was in the book. Probably it was. But I kind of had a bit of that in mind with the old guy in the wheelchair, whose son thinks he's just kind of passive and wimpy, and it turned out he was a dead shot, and he made a choice. He made an active choice not to use weaponry and never to point it at a person. So I had that, and I had the idea of Eternium, which I thought was kind of a really fun idea. The idea of this
Yes.
one rock that powers the whole planet. And I had a lot of fun with Merman in that one, and I think Trapjaw, was the other
Yes.
one. So I had a lot of fun with the villains in that one, but most importantly, I had this overriding message of, and I had to think to myself, because I had to ask myself, am I a pacifist? And no, I'm not really a pacifist. I certainly believe that violence should be the last resort, but I guess a pure pacifist believes in no violence under any circumstances whatsoever. They'll just stand there and be shot rather than be violent. That to me is what a pure pacifist is, and I admire that. I do, but I was thinking about all this stuff and writing the script. It was the most thoughtful script. I had to define my own values about this. What values did I have about it? And I guess my values are that I'm not absolutely 100% against violence in every scene, in every circumstance. I guess there are, in my mind, my value system, there are justifications for violence. So that was the mindset that I brought into the story. And so I thought to myself, well, what could I say that would be unequivocal? And this is what I could say that was unequivocal. And that is that you may or may not believe in violence. You may be a pacifist. You may not be a pacifist. But one thing is, violence should never be fun. It shouldn't be glorified. And, all of these shows that I love violent shows just as much as everybody else. And I like battles, and I like gore when it's, when it's in context and not gratuitous. I like all those things. So it's not that I'm against those things in entertainment. I'm very, very liberal with those things in entertainment. But I think in real life, I just think it's not a good message that it's really cool to be a soldier because you get to shoot people and kill people and you're in violence. But that's the fun part of being a soldier, is these things. And so that was where I landed with the message. And I thought, this is a message that I can get through all the degrees of censorship that I had. I think nobody would argue with that. Hopefully nobody would take issue with that aspect of the message. And I could feel good about standing behind that message, and I could write it. I knew that was a message I could write. So the message was not, don't be violent. It was not, don't join the military. It was not, there's never a cause for war. I wasn't saying any of those things. I was simply saying, it's not fun and games. It's not fun and games. And you should never, ever look at these things as fun and games. You should look at them as serious business, as needing to be justified, and most importantly, as a risk of being injured or killed. And that was what I wanted to communicate in the show. And I think I did. I think I kind of covered all the bases. When I read the script last night, I felt good that I'd covered all those bases and done it in kind of a fun way.
No, and I really appreciate that, because I know the issues of not showing death or really even mentioning it was a big no-no. But in this script and in the finished episode, Eldon, the grandfather, makes a point to say, I was pulled out of the rubble, my legs were paralyzed, but I was one of the lucky ones. Many didn't come out at all. Clearly implying that people lost their lives in the accident that happens in it due to violence. And I think it's great that was allowed in there. It's there. It's just not saying they're all dead. It's clearly a message that, I understood as a child when I watched it. So it was not, I got it. And,
I give so much credit to Lou and to Arthur Nadell. Lou, ultimately, because he was, the buck stopped with him. I mean, they had both of them, both Arthur and Lou, had such strong moral compasses, and they didn't insist on things for no reason. They didn't stand on ceremony. If you had a good reason to talk about death, as I did in this case, and it was for the right reason in service of a great message, they were all for it. You know, they were absolutely. They took a lot of chances. They let me write a Fat Albert. You won't believe this, but I literally wrote a Fat Albert, which was geared to 6 to 12-year-olds. And I wrote mine was on sexually transmitted diseases, and they let me do it. And I mean, I did it in a very innocent way, and a way you could get away with it. But nonetheless, a lot of people would never have agreed to that. And by the way, I should also give credit to a man named Don Roberts. Do you know that name, Don Roberts?
That name sounds very familiar.
He was the guy. He was a professor at Stanford, a professor in communications. And Erica Scheimer, Lou's daughter, had taken his class at Stanford. She went to Stanford, and she got him involved in our shows. And
Is he the one that kind of came in and kind of worked on like the morals that would be?
Yes.
Okay. Yes.
He was essentially our censor in a way. I mean, although he worked for us, so he didn't have the final say. Lou had the final say. We hired him, but his job was to sort of watch out for how our show was going to impact kids and to flag things that he thought would be problems and suggest solutions to them. And I have to say, this guy, you know, writers and censors are natural enemies. I mean, in TV, you always hear writers complaining about the censors and the broadcast standards of people and all that. I have to tell you, Don Roberts was superb. He'd had a great sense of story. He always helped us find creative ways to accomplish what we needed to without just saying you can't. He never said you can't do that. He said it would be better if you do this. And just oftentimes his things were better, even from a story sense, not just from a moral or an educational or a protecting of children's sense. He had a great story sense. He's a wonderful guy, really fun guy. I feel I'm good friends with him to this day. He stayed in my house a couple of years ago when he was passing through town, where we became friends. I basically used him for the rest of my career when I went on to Deke to be an executive. And anytime we needed to have that kind of a voice, Don was the man. So he had to, you know, I'm sure he agreed to this reference to death as well, getting back to your question. So I put it in there. Arthur, Lou, and Don, you know, were broad enough to allow it to stay.
Tremendous. I mean, because it means a lot more even as an adult, because you realize what kind of limitations you guys were given, and that's what makes these episodes even much more impressive to me, is that with the limitations of animation and what you could and could not do in terms of violence and showcasing physical action, a great story that gives you all of that and still stays within the.
Well, and I'll tell you the greatest limitation. You're right about those. Those were both two big limitations: was the pencil mileage and animation limitations, and the censorship limitations. But the biggest limitation was the time. We were under such time pressure. We just had to grind them out. I mean, we had to do 65 half hours in one season. I don't know, but that had ever been done in animation before. I don't think it had. I know it was being done simultaneously by Deke on Inspector Gadget. They did Inspector Gadget 65 episodes the same year as we were working on He-Man, but they weren't doing it all in the same building the way we were. They were outsourcing everything. So the time pressure we had was just intense.
It's all like just hearing the stories of what the process was like. I can't even imagine what like a regular day would be at Filmation, other than like what Lou said. Like he just knew it was going to be able to keep a lot of people in work. It was going to provide a lot of jobs for a lot of people. And I guess in hindsight,
that was so important to him. He really, really, really cared about that. That was one of his guiding principles in life. Is he wanted to keep people employed. He wanted to keep animation in America. He wanted to keep it in Los Angeles. He wanted to keep it in the building. He didn't want the crafts to be lost. All the various crafts. You know, there's all these different stages of animation. There's in-betweening, and it was called Xeroxing then, and there's camera. There's each department. You know, there were maybe 9 departments, and each one was a unique craft. And Lou valued these craftspeople and wanted these crafts passed on and didn't want them to die. I mean, it's just when you add his principles and what he believed in to what just a great guy he was. I mean, there's nobody you would rather sit next to at a long dinner than Lou Scheimer. He was a great raconteur. He was funny. He was, you know, he had kind of a dirty mouth. You know, he would swear a lot, and he's just, you know, but God, he was something special. It's so hard to communicate what a special human being this was, and And what a great loss to the world that he is not in this world anymore. I mean, he's the most special person I've ever known by a long, long distance.
What would you say is probably like, if there's one story you would share with fans or people who never knew Lou, that solidifies him as why he is, such a memorable name attached to He-Man, along with Filmation and many other cartoons. What makes him such?
I can't think of any one story. I can just tell you he was larger than life. He's a very tall guy. He had incredible charisma, and he just cared about. He had a heart. He had such a big heart. He cared about everybody. He was tough, and he managed to run a studio, to found the studio, to start it, to run it, to be wildly successful, and always to be a nice person. It's so rare to see people that successful that actually care about people. He tells a great story. There's a book written by a guy named Andy Mangels, a book on Filmation, and that book is unbelievably accurate. I mean, everything I know about half of that book was written before I came to Filmation, so I can't vouch for it. But all the stuff that was written since I was in the picture is so accurate down to the smallest detail. And I mean, Lou had an incredible memory among everything else. He was an incredibly detailed memory before he got sick. And there's a great story in the book, which Lou told me many, many times. He was such a wonderful raconteur. You can't imagine a better storyteller than Lou Scheimer. And he told about how Filmation got its first gig, and they were hired to do the Superman show, and they didn't have a studio. And Lou and his partner Norm Prescott had basically misrepresented themselves, saying they had a studio. They didn't have one. And the guys came out from New York to check out the studio that were hiring him to do it. So he had to basically create this whole false studio, and he got his friends to come in and pretend to be artists. And I mean, I can't begin to do the story justice, but it's such a fantastic story, and it's all in that book. I highly recommend anybody that's interested in Lou or in Filmation. That book tells exactly how it was. Everything you read in that book is true.
Definitely need to get that. I've heard of the book. I just unfortunately have not picked it up yet.
It's amazing. It's color. It's got all these great pictures. It's a super, super fun book. And it's Lou, it's spoken in the voice of Lou, and it's him. He really is.
We've had you for an hour and a half here about,
wow.
and I told you, I was like, you give me any time. It's not. I'm going to be able to just go on and on and on. And
well, I think I'm the one that went on and on and on with all my digressions.
Oh, I told you, it's like, here you weren't going to be able to give us an hour's worth of stuff. I'm like, Robbie, you're in good hands here. We're gonna get a whole idea. I didn't even touch the tip of the iceberg. Like, I feel like I could have gone into so many more details on what I've already discussed with you. And I know we want to give the listeners a chance to kind of talk with you before we let you go.
Okay, sure, yeah.
Yeah, so I guess if any of you guys in the chat have any questions for him, go ahead and get those lined up, and we'll start asking those. I guess I'll go ahead and toss one of the first questions at you. You've worked on so many things, because I was looking at your credentials on IMDb.
Yeah.
So many things that you've worked on, and you touched on how Bill Cosby was, and you were just kind of turned off by that. Were there any of these other shows that either were a blast to do, or were there some of these projects that you're just kind of glad that you were able to just get away from?
Well, there are definitely both, but in the sense of saying something positive, we worked on a series called Camp Candy.
I remember watching that on Fox.
Yeah, it was John Candy, and he was a delight. I really, really, really enjoyed working with him. I found him just wonderful and gracious, and a pleasure to work with. So that made the show fun to work with. It really can affect the show. We worked on Super Dave with a guy named Bob Einstein, who's now
remember that.
If you watch Curb Your Enthusiasm, he's a regular on Curb Your Enthusiasm now. He's one of the funniest men I have ever met in my life. And so that show was really a lot of fun.
And he's good on Curb, too. I like him a lot.
Oh, he's great on Curb. He's just but he's sort of like that in real life. Curb, a lot of Curb is improvised. They don't really have scripts on outlines, and they improvise. And that's kind of how Bob is. He's quiet. What he told me, one of the funniest lines I ever heard is I went to a meeting with Bob, and he just read one of the scripts for our series, our Super Dave animated series. And he said to me, he said to the room, it was a meeting. He said, this script is so bad I'd throw it out the window, but it might hit somebody with talent.
I like
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
That's
I mean,
good.
it was a cutting line, but it was so funny. He was a funny man. So that was a fun show to work on, and I enjoyed working with Bob a lot. I had an experience with Tom Cruise.
Really?
Yeah, he was. We did a series called Captain Planet,
Yes.
and I'm going to digress here, but it's kind of fun. We did this with Ted Turner, and this was the first environmental superhero. This was in, I think, the '90s, early '90s. It was long before it became as hot a topic as it later became. And we put a big announcement in the trades that we're going to do this thing with Ted Turner as environmental superhero. And amazingly, we started getting calls from all these celebrities wanting to participate in it because it become sort of a hip, au courant thing to do. And our head of talent got a call from, it's a call, and the guy on the lines on the other end of the phone says, "Yes, this is Tom Cruise." And the talent says, "Well, hi, I'm Ringo Starr. I'm glad to meet you." She thought it was a joke, but it actually was Tom Cruise, and he wanted to play the voice of Captain Planet. So,
Wow.
So I got to go along with my boss at the time, Andy Hayward. We went to Tom's office and met with Tom for a couple hours, and then he came back to the studio. We took him on a tour around the studio, and I have to say, he was so gracious and so kind to everybody, and everybody made a big fuss over him at the studio, and he couldn't have been nicer to everybody. It was, and he was bright, very smart, and so it was a great experience I had with him. So there's all kinds. There have been a lot of assholes. There's a lot of miserable people, and they make the job miserable. And there's a lot of really fun people, and they help make the job great.
Can you give us one of those assholes just at random?
No.
That makes sense though.
I completely understand that. It's just your response.
It's always an amazing thing because Tyler and I go to other conventions, and some of the stories that we pull out of some of these guys and some of the names that they drop of just, hey, that guy was an asshole. You're like, wow, I never would have thought that. And so, oh man.
I'd rather mention names in a good context.
Yeah, no. Yeah.
Very professional of you there, Robbie. Very.
But it is good to know that there are those kinds of people out there. Yeah. Well, I'll say this, and you don't have to say names, but were there any of these people that surprised you that they were jerks? You thought that, oh man, I can't wait for that, and then you meet him, you're like, oh wow, that was awful. I'm sure that happened a lot, right? It had to.
No, it did. I'm sure it did, and nothing is coming to mind at the moment.
All right. Questions lined up for Robbie in there?
Yeah. We got one from Sportimus. He just kind of wants to ask if you remember his shirt. He had "Make Eternia Great Again." Skeletor.
I certainly do. In fact, that's one of my strong memories from the from is that shirt. I loved that shirt. I definitely remember it. It's brilliant.
Well, there you go.
But you have to add that you need the context. It had a picture of Skeletor in sort of an electioneering pose with stars and stripes around, like Skeletor was running for office, and the caption was "Make Eternia Great Again."
Well, there you go, Sportimus. He remembered your shirt. Not only did he remember it, but he loved it. Let's see. Grim 2 wanted to know if you were involved with the development of Secret of the Sword.
Remind me of what Secret of the Sword was, and then I'll answer the question.
That was the first 5 episodes of She-Ra, and they released it as like one big film.
I had nothing to do with She-Ra. At the end of the first season of He-Man, I got promoted into a completely different role at Filmation, which was fantastic for me, but it meant I was no longer involved in the ongoing series, except every now and then I would do a script. I did one script for Brave Star, and I did some scripts for Filmation's Ghostbusters, but I was not involved in She-Ra at all. Zero.
All right.
JSP wants to know if you could remind us what your reaction was to the return of Faker.
I don't even remember the return of.
It's a fan film that James E. talked.
Right, that yes. Sorry, I thought it was one of the episodes. Oh my God! Well, first of all, it was presented at the PowerCon with James doing an introduction, explaining the mind-bogglingly detailed and intense process that he had done to try and recreate a new episode from scratch. I couldn't believe anybody would actually do what he had done. So I was primed from just the dedication that this man had shown to do this. And then they showed I guess it was the first half of it, and it was brilliant. It looked just like a He-Man episode to me. I thought it was great. I didn't remember the title, obviously, so I apologize for that, but I thought it was great.
Awesome.
Adam Gabbert asked, and you may have kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but what is your favorite episode that you worked on while you're doing He-Man, whether it's the ones you wrote or any that you were just involved with, period, during this entire process?
Well, the only other episodes I was involved in besides the ones I wrote were a few that I had to rewrite. And, I don't really think of those as my episodes. And I of the ones I had to rewrite, I didn't like any of those as well as I liked. I think Double-Edged Sword is my favorite, and Dawn of Dragoon is a close second. Those were the two I really felt good about. Then and now.
All right. Zentron wants to know what show that you worked on would you have liked to done a second season that didn't get one?
Oh, that's a great question. Boy. I don't think Super Dave got a second. Maybe it did. I can't remember. But we did a 65 episode. Maybe it was 30 episode. I can't remember. God, there were so many. I think I counted up, and I've worked on over 2,500 half hours of television. So it's really a upgrade. But we did a series that was at least 30 episodes and might have been more, called The Wacky World of Tex Avery. This was a Deke, and it was an homage to Tex Avery and those old Warner Brothers squash and stretch cartoons, which I loved. Everybody loves those. Who doesn't love those?
Yes.
All that stuff. So we tried to do sort of an homage to those, and we of course couldn't come close because we were doing 65 in one season with censorship, and they were doing 5-minute cartoons in 6 months with no censorship. So, and they were geniuses and we weren't, so we couldn't come close. But it was really fun to work on, and there was some fun stuff in it. I wish we could have done more of those. What else do I wish we could have done?
What are your thoughts on the Cops series that you worked on? Because I absolutely love that series.
I enjoyed Cops a lot, and we had a great. The people at Hasbro were great. That was a good experience, and I liked the series a lot. I have well, I won't. Go ahead. Next question. I was just going to say I don't want to be teased about it. One of the really nice things that the Hasbro guys did for me, I really always appreciate this. Guy named Kirk Bazigian was the G.I. Joe guy at Hasbro. We later went on to do G.I. Joe. And a great guy, Kirk Bazigian. I really liked him. And he and his team, one of the action figures of G.I. Joe is called Rapid Fire.
Yes.
On the back of the blister pack for Rapid Fire, there's a background of who this character is, and they actually said the character's real name is Robby London. Born it's a little
like the file card on the back for Rapid Fire.
Yeah.
I've got to go look that up.
Yeah, they misspelled my name, but other than that, it was great.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, that was something that was really a thrill for me. They gave me one, and I still got it. And gosh, that was such an honor. I was really, really touched by that. So I'll always have a great feeling for Hasbro just because of that.
You've been immortalized as a G.I. Joe. That is fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you decided to divulge that, because you were sort of stopping yourself. And that's kind of the thing on this show that we always do. We always have our sidetracks and our side rants. So you feel free to just kind of go any direction that you want to go.
It was kind of self-serving, but I was really proud of it. So what the hell?
You should be. That's an awesome story.
Yeah, it was great.
Sportimus asked another question. If you could go back in time and change anything in writing for Masters of the Universe, what would it be?
I'm thinking. I mean, I haven't thought about this until the last day or two. I really haven't thought about this in so long, but it just, well, I'll tell you what, I got the answer for that. I would rewrite Diamond Ray of Destruction.
I knew that was coming. I was just counting the seconds.
All right, well, what would you do differently? How would you write it?
I would honest to God, I would try to come up with a completely different story. What I would do. I don't think there was much of a story there.
Oh, sure there was. It was an excellent story.
Well, anyway, I'm thrilled you liked it, but that's what I would change if I had my druthers.
I'd have been over your shoulder the whole time, I just, or at least make sure Triclops and He-Man Duke had at some point in there, because that was my favorite moment, and having that triumphant moment.
I'll
like
tell you another. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
oh no, just to me, what defies that episode is when the Evil Wars pull down the drawbridge and He-Man and Battlecat are waiting there as alpha male as they possibly could be, and just say, "Next time you might want to try knocking first." Like that is a kick-ass hero, and that's all testament to you, Robbie.
Thank you. I'm really happy that you like it. I really.
I think you're I don't.
You got to stop forcing him to like this, man.
I know, because I really feel like he's just telling me.
No, but listen. I'm happy to hear it. It's great. It's great to hear that your work made anybody happy. There's nothing better than that to hear. So thank you. I'm thrilled. I really am.
But I would be very interested to see what you could do with rewriting Diamond Ray. Like I would never ever say don't try it, because I would love to know what you could do with it. I'm just saying,
Tyler, you would have to pay me more money than you could afford.
Really? Well, I mean, just take a check.
Here's another regret. I don't know. Is there a time limit? Should I stop?
No.
No, it's no.
All the time you need, sir. All the time you need.
Here's a great regret that I have in my career, in terms of not getting to write, not getting to work on something. We were in bed at one point with the James Bond people, and I love James Bond, and we were going to do an animated James Bond, and I was really excited about this, and I got doubly excited when the James Bond people said they wanted to hire a writer. They wanted their writer to develop this because they wanted to control the copyright. They just wanted to keep control. They didn't want us to hire. Normally, when we do a partnership, we would hire a writer to develop it, and they would have all the approval rights in the world, but we would write it. But they said, no, we want to hire the writer. And my boss at the time, Andy Hayward, said, I've got a great idea for you. And it was, of course, this was a self-serving idea for Andy, but he said, why don't you hire Robbie to write? He's a great writer. He was one of the creators of He-Man, and he's one of the best writers out there. He's not writing it. I was working at the time as an executive at Deke. I hadn't written in several years at all. And Andy said, I'll give you Robbie, and you hire him. And he asked me, he volunteered me before asking, but he asked me about it. And I said, sure, that would be great. I'd love to do it. I said, Andy, if you'll give me a leave of absence from Deke, because I can't be an executive and a writer at the same time. It's just, executive is just all consuming. And I need to stay away from the office and stay home and write. And he said, sure, no problem. So I made a deal with the James Bond people. I negotiated a deal. They hired me. And I worked with a guy named Michael Wilson, who was Cubby Broccoli's son-in-law. Cubby Broccoli was the first original producer of James Bond. And then his daughter, Barbara Broccoli, and her husband, Michael Wilson, took over the running of everything about James Bond. They are James Bond to this day, Barbara Broccoli and her husband, Michael Wilson. And I got along great with Michael Wilson. I really, really liked him. He reminded me a little bit of Arthur Nadell, my first boss. And I had this wonderful, wonderful experience working with him, developing a Bible for James Bond Jr. And I also wrote 3 really detailed story outlines that would have been, episodes that I thought I was really happy with. And I was excited. I was really excited to be working with Michael and to do this series, and Deke was going to do the series. And then the business deal fell apart between Deke and the distributor and the James Bond people. We couldn't make the business happen. And they ended up taking my Bible to another studio, to Murakami Wolf, I believe it was. And they did the show with Murakami Wolf, and I had nothing more to do with it. And to their credit, they gave me credit, screen credit, for developing the show. Again, my name is spelled, but I thought that was very generous and fair for them to give me screen credit for development. And yet I never got to work on the series. And so
that's got to be really heartbreaking, like absolutely heartbreaking.
It was terrible because I love James Bond. In fact, I had this fantasy that I was going to work on the series a little bit and really get close with Michael Wilson, and then weasel my way into writing the next James Bond movie. That was my fantasy, but never happened.
So I guess at that time that probably would have been like Timothy Dalton playing James Bond. It
was around that era. Yeah, it was definitely around that era. And Michael did call me 6 months later after all this, and he said, I'm working on something else. He said, could I hire you to work on it with me? And I really wanted to do it, but I just couldn't because my executive job was it was all consuming. And I was able to do the James Bond Jr. thing because it was going to be a Deke project. So Andy was willing to let me do it, and I felt okay about doing it. I did not feel right about I didn't even ask Andy if I could go work on something else with Michael, on a moonlighting basis, because I just didn't feel it was right. My job was exhausting, and I couldn't do both. So I had to pass.
Wow. What was the project?
He never told me. I think it was some TV thing. I don't know what it was.
Still absolutely fascinating.
I think we only have one last question here in the chat, and I guess we can kind of evolve this into something else, because being so involved in the process, you might look at this differently. They want to know your thoughts on the new She-Ra, and if you've watched it, feel free to give your thoughts. But maybe just kind of the current state of animation. How do you feel about it? Do you think it's changed radically? Does the writing aspects of it seem lazier to you these days? Because we sort of notice it in a lot of the cartoons that we watch now, especially things that get brought back like Ninja Turtles and Transformers over and over again, that it seems like just a steady decline in terms of quality and the writing aspect of it all.
Well, this is a very easy question to answer, and it'll be an extremely fast and unsatisfying answer. But the truth is, I don't watch any stuff. I barely watch TV, and I certainly don't watch animation or kid stuff. It's just, to me, that was my job. And I spend my life doing music now. So I don't know. The answer is, my answer is, I have no idea.
Okay.
I've not seen the new She-Ra show. I've heard about it, but I haven't seen it.
Well, you're probably better off.
Yes.
Yeah, what do you guys think? What's your opinion?
Tyler watched 16 minutes of the first episode. I watched all 13, and it just not good. Not appealing. It definitely has its demographic. The target audience they were trying to go for. I think they would hit with that, but in regards to older fans coming in and checking it out, it might not be for everybody.
What do you guys like to watch these days?
I mean, I still, to this day, I still watch, the cartoons that I grew up on, He-Man, She-Ra, Thundercats, G.I. Joe, Transformers, things like that. Current stuff, like watching the Marvel Netflix shows like Daredevil and things like that. I don't watch, honestly, I'm about as far removed from current TV because there's nothing on TV that I care. So I don't even have cable. So I just watch stuff on YouTube and Netflix, and that's in my movies, and that's really about it.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat as Tyler.
What do you think about this? What do you think about the superhero movies, all the Marvel movies?
I really loved them for a while, and then I felt like the pace and the change of it became more comedic. Where the superhero movies they're trying to focus more on comedy and being silly, as opposed to telling us great superhero action adventure films with hints of humor here and there. Where I'm like, everyone's laughing at these movies. I'm coming to get excited and get goosebumps and watch my favorite heroes on the silver screen, and they're just becoming comedians on the screen now. So They were great for a while, and I feel like that it's just changed for me. I've just kind of bowed out for quite a while until things change.
What do you guys know about the He-Man live action movie that's been kicking around the studio?
Joe and Tyler talk about this all the time. It's like they keep just bouncing around to the point now where Joe and Tyler are just like, all right, if they actually start filming it and everything, then I'll kind of get excited. But for now, it's just like, we've hired a director, and then time goes by. Oh, well, they left the project.
So what's the current status? Do you know?
It's Sony has lost the rights because they just would announce stuff and never came to fruition. I think Universal has the film rights now. I believe, or no, Mattel has reobtained the film rights. Universal Pictures is involved somehow with that, but Sony has lost the rights. All the directors they had hired, they've all left the project. They're all gone. So I know it's in the hands of Mattel, I think, of possibly maybe doing something. But when they made an announcement that they've got the rights back, it was just kind of like, I don't care, because until they actually say they're doing something with it, where they've hired actors, a script has been approved, a director that's actually going to stick with it, it's been in limbo for years. I mean, they would report stuff on various websites. Hey, John Woo's attached, or this guy's attached, or the director of Kung Fu Panda is attached. And you didn't buy any of it, because obviously, and it's a shame, maybe, well, not so much anymore, because I feel like G.I. Joe, Transformers, and Turtles in recent films have all been horrible. They don't treat it with any dignity or any respect. And honestly, I just say, if you're not going to make a really good, serious He-Man film, don't make it at all. And anytime the news pops up, I just ignore it. It's like a fart in the wind to me. Like, I could care less, because no one's going to actually take it seriously. because the studios don't seem to be taking it seriously. So I just, it's heartbreaking, but I kind of feel like it.
It's surprising. It's really surprising to me that nobody has done it.
I am too, and I mean, I really at times kind of. I mean, there is a great movie to be told with these characters. Like I can visualize it. I could clearly see these characters on the screen doing battles, giving great speeches, and the expanding the world on the screen. It clearly can work. Mm-hmm. It's just unfortunately it feels like people who work in the film industry either don't quite grasp the concept, or because He-Man is kind of made to be a joke in popular culture right now in certain forms of media, it's almost as if, like, if we make a movie, people are not going to take it seriously because they like to poke fun at He-Man. Like saying he's not masculine because he wears a loincloth, or he's wearing a skimpy outfit, so therefore he's not masculine enough. Or it's just, it feels like the continent consensus is let's make fun of He-Man and Skeletor, as opposed to this was like a great sign of what it was like to be a man. That was, to me, that's how I saw it as a kid. It comes off more like a joke in the public eye, I feel like, and that's what makes me very disgruntled about it. So, and those are just my thoughts. I just don't. I almost feel like studios don't quite grasp the concept. Like, it's got fantasy and science fiction. How are we going to put this on the screen? I have no idea, but it breaks my heart because there is a great film that can be told.
That's why Robby just needs to grab his phone and make the call and be like, you know what, I will write this movie for you guys.
Oh yeah,
I would be happy to write it. They don't want me, I'd be delighted.
Because I've often thought this too, and this is just all coincidence, but that dialogue that you wrote for Greatest Adventures of All with the source, like, I would love to see that on screen, like the going through outer space, seeing the meteor shower, and then landing on Eternity and seeing various shots of the planet, and then building up to Grayskull, and then introducing the audience in the live action film the way that you did in the Greatest Adventures of All. Like, it worked beautifully there. It would look even better in live action. I mean, it's such powerful storytelling. You clearly should be the man to do something like that. Man. Maybe that's what we need to do. We need to form like a Kickstarter or something to get Robby hired as
don't hold your breath.
I guess it's all wishful thinking here. Well, I guess we'll kind of wrap this up, Robby, and we don't want to hold you up anymore because you've been extremely gracious with your time this evening. And
it was really fun. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Good. That's what we really wanted to do, is to make sure you had a good time.
Thank you so much for your interest in all this, and your interest in my work and all the kind words. It's been great. Really,
absolutely. I mean, I still got so much more. I mean, there's stuff about just working at Filmation, the process of writing and things like that. There's other things that we didn't get to touch on that I already had in the back of my mind. I wanted to make sure and ask you. And I mean, hopefully we could have you back, because I definitely could do it.
I'd be happy to do it. I don't really know if I have much left to tell you, but I'd be happy to try.
Oh, absolutely, because Joe's not here. He loves Heart of a Giant, and I that's something I definitely wanted to elaborate, at least because you worked on the premise of that.
Right.
The writing process, the day-to-day duties at Filmation as you moved up the ladder. I mean, there's so many other things I would love to elaborate on if we could get you back at some point.
Be happy to. Be my pleasure.
Excellent.
Fantastic. Excellent.
Well, Robby, since we didn't get to say this at the beginning, you just hang on here, and then we'll get the broadcast stopped after the show, and we can kind of just talk and thank you a little bit more before we totally let you off the air. But I want to say thanks to everyone that joined us live in the chat. Thank you for all the questions that you had for Robby. And man, Tyler, do you have any recommendations? Anything you wanna throw out before we?
I say check out all of Robby's episodes, and especially Dawn of Dragoon, Double-Edged Sword. I mean, they are very powerful episodes. Jariel's Return's another good episode because he depicts Clawful in such a badass manner in that episode. And I dare say Diamond Red Disappearance. I'm never going to let that go, Robby.
And I'm glad you won't.
I simply will not. I used to depict my action figures in the fights from that episode quite a bit as a child. So, yeah. So those are my recommendations. Anything with Robby's name attached to it. Heart of a Giant. He did the premise of that. We'll elaborate more on that next time when he's on with us. But anything with that man's name on that is worth checking out this week, people.
And I guess also in closing, I'll go ahead and say if you guys are new to the channel, make sure you hit subscribe, ring the bell so you get notified when we go live or when new videos get posted. Check us out on Podbean and iTunes. If you guys want to find us on YouTube from either of those audio platforms, look up youtube.com/fansofpower podcast. And I guess until then, have a powerful day.